So this is LG demonstration number 1, PT57, section 1, questions 12 through 17. If you guys already are kind of familiar with the more difficult set of games out there, this is a relatively old one. It's from 2009, but it is the notorious mauve dinosaurs situation. And frankly, I think this has not really aged that well over time as a quote-unquote difficult game. I think they've found many different ways, and they've dredged up older, older ghosts of LSAT past to scare people. So I don't think this one holds up quite as well as a difficult one. But for its time, it threw a lot of people for a loop. And even now, just because of its hybrid nature alone, a lot of people are going to struggle with it. So the reason why I'm doing demonstrations, in addition to the generalized lessons, is that I'm just really not happy with how the lesson turned out. I don't think I'm ever going to take down the videos that I put up, but there are some organizational choices that I would make differently, but more so than just my particular delivery, which I fully admit I'm very new to this. I'm not very seasoned at making a pre-recorded talk on these topics, but really just interacting with students and some people on Reddit. It looks like a lot of the methodology and a lot of what I teach and what anybody would teach really doesn't come through very well in a generalized abstract format, so it may work best if I just do a whole game. At least that's what the thought was. So we'll see where this goes. I think I'll demonstrate and do at least 2 or 3 more of these videos on some of the more notorious games, but we'll start with this one and see where it goes. So for anyone unfamiliar with what my methodology is, I'll just go through a quick refresher on it, just so you're not completely lost and you have some idea of what I'm doing. First phase, the setup. I identify the game type, I look for what I call a rule 0, and I draw a baseline diagram. If I'm looking at a hybrid situation, I do have something of a priority list. You can find that in some of my lessons and other short videos if you'd like to. But that's basically what I'm doing at the beginning. It's pretty typical of what anybody does in any method, except for maybe the rule 0 part. But even then, so just to confirm what rule 0 is, it's just another condition that's added to the game that is important to know but has not been listed as a separate rule. So very often in an ordering game, they'll mention as a sort of rule 0 in that intro paragraph that there are no ties, there are no repeats, everyone's got to show up once. Those kinds of restrictions are very handy to have, and not every single game has them. So that's something to be careful of. But even though it's not written out as a separate rule, it's the kind of thing that I find helpful to keep track of, so I'm looking for that sort of thing. Once I've done all the basic setup stuff, and that takes literally seconds, we're going to get into the rules. This is very, very important. We don't necessarily take too long in this stage either, but it is still perhaps the single most important stage to do for your long-term success. So what we are doing in the rules phase is to visually translate the rules, make them reflect our diagram, and we are not actively looking for deductions. I want to emphasize that last part. I will not be actively looking for any single deduction ever. If there is anything that I do happen to find, maybe I'll add that to my list of things that we know about this game as we go along. But at this phase, before doing questions, before being faced with particular situations and specific scenarios, I will be putting absolutely 0 active effort into finding a deduction. And I would advise any test taker and any studier to do the same. And finally, we get to phase 3, which is the actual sort of most tangibly important part, which is the questions, because the questions are what ultimately get us points. So my procedure for moving through questions is divided in turn into 3 stages. Stage 1 is very simple and self-explanatory. If there is any information that the question stem provides, I insert that into the diagram and fill in anything that must be true based on that. So if a question stem puts entity A in slot 3, I literally put A in slot 3, and then I see if there's anything that has to come out of that immediately. If there's nothing obvious to me, I move on. So that's stage 1, just putting the information that the question stem has into a diagram, seeing if there's anything obvious that is a necessary result of that, and putting that in there, otherwise moving on to stage 2. So stage 2, after I've done stage 1. Stage 1 is all about putting in what the question proposes, the question stem proposes, and then seeing if anything must be true based on that. Stage 2 is looking at your stage 1 work and seeing past that what could be true. So because we are dealing with the possible instead of the certain, there's always some measure of variability here. And a lot of people get into trouble trying to draw too many pictures. Again, my rule of thumb, draw no more than 3 possible pictures. Once you hit that limit, yes, it does feel arbitrary. Sometimes there are situations where there's 4, but it's still pretty well under control. I mean, find that line for yourself. My recommendation will always stay at 3. Draw no more than 3 possible pictures. If there are more than 3 possible pictures, or you have 0 pictures because there's just so much variability, you don't even know where to start, stop drawing. That's fine. Stop drawing and instead focus on just getting a feel for how the rules and entities interact. And if that get a feel for how it works sounds vague, it's vague for a purpose. That's exactly what I am hoping that you got out of it. How each and every situation plays out is a little bit different. So what you need to maintain is a flexibility of approach, such that you're not always looking to fit square pegs into round holes or vice versa. You shouldn't be looking to do that. Instead, for the widest spread success, especially when you want to go up against a quote unquote challenging game, you want to retain that flexibility. So rather than trying to make everything fit some predetermined rubric that you've learned from whoever out there, right? Certainly not from me because I never teach any of those, but from whatever methodology out there. Like that's not gonna get you anywhere. Just try to understand for the particular situation at hand how Rule 1 interacts with Rule 3, how this entity interacts with that rule, and kind of gets dangerous when you put it towards one end of the diagram or the other. That sort of thing is very flexible. It changes from game to game. So be aware, be alert, know that that's how these things work, and just be on the lookout for that sort of thing. All right, so I just went through that spiel about, I don't really teach specific techniques. Stage 3 involves like the one part of this entire exam, really, where I teach something that approaches anything near a sort of named technique, and that is what I call the table of power. So again, stage 1, we plugged in information from the stem, and then we saw if there was any obvious consequence of that. Stage 2, we look at what we've done for stage 1, and instead of looking at the obvious must be true consequence, we are looking for the could be true situations. And very often in stage 2, there's a ton of possibilities. So I would say stop drawing pictures once you've got maybe about 3 different pictures available. And once you hit that point, or conversely, if it's too confusing and too variable and too up in the air for you to draw even one single picture, just stop trying to draw. Stop trying to draw and instead focus on just getting a feel for the rules and how they interact. And after you've done that, now you're ready for stage 3. And so that's when you begin testing answer choices. So stage 1 and stage 2, we're looking at the question stem and taking information from the stem into account and the rules. Now at stage 3, you are looking at the answer choices and you're trying to plug an answer choice into your stage 2 work. So after you have stage 2 work, to the extent that you do, sometimes it's a blank picture because you weren't able to do any. Sometimes it's fairly extensive. Who really knows, right? But once you have some stage 2 work done and you're moving on to stage 3, follow the table of power, which is detailed below here. If a question ends in could be true, you plug in your answer choice into your stage 2 diagram as it is, no alterations. So if you plug it in as it is and it works, then that is the answer you're looking for, so you select it. A similar kind of approach for a must be false question. When you're doing stage 3 on must be false, you plug in an answer choice as it is. If it works as is, then you eliminate it. It is not the one you're looking for. Thirdly, if we move over to must be true, what our procedure tells us to do here is to plug in an alternative to the answer choice. If it works, then we eliminate it. Of course, there's a little bit of an art/science to finding alternatives, but it's actually significantly easier than most people imagine it might be. And finally, for real, we get to the could be false category, where we plug in an alternative to the answer choice that we are testing, and if that alternative works, then we select it. So hopefully you've had a chance to call up or get a copy of the Prep Test 57 Section 1 Game 3, which is the mauve dinosaur one that we're doing. If you haven't had a chance to do that yet, pause the video real quick right now and get it, because I will not reproduce it for this video verbatim, simply because I don't have licensing to do that here. Instead, we'll just kind of discuss the work on it. So if you want to see the actual game, get a copy of it and then unpause and follow along. Alright, assuming that you have now caught up and you have a copy of the game available, again, it's Prep Test 57, Section 1, the third game, the mauve dinosaurs, or the various colored dinosaurs. We'll start right up with Phase 1, the setup. So looking at the intro paragraph, I'm going to ID the game type. And it looks like at first we have at least a matching situation. And I say matching based on a couple things. We're going to match a color to each dinosaur, and there are less colors than dinosaurs. We're probably going to end up reusing colors. So the reuse of entities and the repetition of entities is, to me, a hallmark of a matching situation. And also the other hallmark, as I'm saying down here in my second point, is that colors tend to be a matching class of entity a lot of times. Again, because it's one of those limited entity classes where it makes sense that they will be repeated, because we've definitely seen that you can have several things of the same color, and that's something that intuitively makes sense to us. So because the fact that we are using colors and the colors are going to be reused across dinosaurs, those two things pretty clearly indicate to me that there's a matching situation. However, as we keep reading, I noticed something. It looks like at the end they add an in and out situation. The paragraph tells us near the end that we are going to pick exactly 5 out of the 7 dinosaurs to be in some kind of display. So, a couple things that's kind of handy. I guess the first thing I'll notice is that as I'm looking for a rule 0, I don't really see anything that I would consider a rule 0. The closest thing is maybe the exactly 5 dinosaurs thing. That is very helpful, but that is going to end up being hard coded into the diagram. Speaking of the diagram, may as well get into it right here. So my hybrid priority list, which you may have seen from other lessons, basically puts grouping at the top, puts ordering second highest, and then puts matching and in and out kind of very close third and fourth with each other there. They're matching and ordering to me basically don't have their own diagrams. I just kind of gave matching third place because older classic pure matching games did used to have their own separate diagram. It was kind of a Venn diagram situation, not a Venn diagram, like a syllogistic logic table sort of thing, X's and O's, like a tic-tac-toe kind of situation. More and more so, as I find in hybrid situations, it's actually matching that is almost equally or even more an afterthought than the in and out part. So I'm reconsidering my hybrid priority list, but either way, matching and in and out are basically pictureless in hybrid situations, so it's not like it made much of a difference. But that's what we're working with here. So, according to my priority list, maybe I'd draw like a matching table first and not really do anything with the in and out part. But what drew me initially on my first try of this game, as I remember doing it so many years ago, was I was really drawn to the fact that we're using exactly 5 out of the 7 dinosaurs. That is not a limitation that we often get in and out situations. Oftentimes, for a pure in and out game, we could pick as few as 2 entities to be in, and maybe as high as 5 to be in, if we're dealing with a pool of 7. That's a huge amount of variability, and that was fairly typical, I would say, for a pure in and out game. But here, we're picking exactly 5 out of 7. That's pretty limited, and that's pretty handy. It takes a lot of the difficulty and variability, I'd say, out of an in and out situation. So because that's so firm, I decided to kind of go with that because it lent itself to an easy diagram. So really, I started by thinking that I could hard code that into the diagram with the following setup. You start with 5 blanks, just with the understanding that even though it looks like a typical ordering situation, we're not going to be putting anything in order. So, unless you have some compulsion anytime you see a bunch of blanks that you're always going to end up trying to put things in order and confuse yourself, unless you have some weird problem like that, I don't really see that reusing that diagram here in this instance is going to be that difficult. And finally, now that I've determined that I'm going to use these 5 blanks to represent, okay, whatever 5 we pick out of the 7 are going to go in here. How do we get the matching bit in there? Well, I just decided to take care of it simply like I often do in other situations. This is how I add matching into, let's say, something like ordering or in and out. I'm just going to write the dinosaurs on top of the line, and I'm going to write their colors beneath them. That's how it's going to work. Easy peasy. All right. Now getting into the all-important rules. So if you recall from the last slide, my picture was basically just going to be a series of 5 blank lines. I am going to write the dinosaurs letter on the top side of the line and the color below the line. So when I visually translate my rules, I'm going to translate them like so. Rule number 1 tells us that we have exactly 2 mauve dinosaurs. I'm going to show 2 blanks and write M's underneath them, and I'm going to put a box around them. Again, it doesn't matter if, since order doesn't matter, this is an ordering game, I feel safe just kind of doing this. But as you may be familiar, the general parlance that me and a lot of other people use for saying that something is firm, exact, always going to be this way is just to put a box around it. So this is something that's just shorthand for me showing that I'm going to have 2 mauves in my picture, and this is what it's going to look like. Rule 2 is very similar and very handy. It's that S is always going to show up, and it's always going to be red. The stegosaurus is always going to be included, and it's always going to be red. So that also gets the same visual treatment, gets a box around Rule 3, I used a circle to indicate, usually when you have a pure in and out game, you circle things and cross them out as they are respectively put in or thrown out. So just to kind of reflect that this is an in and out situation a little bit, even though it's unnecessary. Rule 3, anytime, if I is used, it will always be green. So if you select I, then you're going to end up with I over G. It's going to be a green I. Rule 4 is the same thing, except it's just different letters. If you end up using a P anywhere, it will always have to be the Y color. So this is only triggered if you decide to use the P. Rule 5 is going to be probably a handy rule because this is just something that I know from experience, given that we have 7 letters to pick from, but 5 slots to choose, but then 2 of them can never be used at the same time, so it's kind of like we really only have 6 letters. I'll get into that, but that's just something that I see naturally, but I'm not going to bother spinning out the deduction fully here. It's just something that I know from experience, so even if you don't know that, you're going to be perfectly fine. But either way, this is an if-then situation that I decide to contrapose as well. If you pick V, you can't pick U, and if you decide to put U in, you also conversely cannot pick V. They can't show up together, basically. And finally, we get to Rule 6. If you have both L and U, one of them has to be not over the mauve slots. So if you have L and U show up at the same time, you can't have them both occupying the mauve slots that we may have found in Rule number 1. Finally, just because this is how this game works, and I don't want to teach you to ignore very easy low-hanging fruit stuff, Rules 1 and 2 are the kind of rule that we can throw directly into our diagram and be very happy about it, and that will always make sure that we're taking care of Rule 1 and Rule 2. So off to the right here, I have an updated baseline diagram. Instead of just the 5 blank lines, this is the information that we can have for every single question. In the first spot, again, the order doesn't matter, it's just first because there's nothing else in there. We're going to put a stegosaurus in S, and it's going to be the red color. And again, the next 2 slots, it's not because the order matters, I'm just taking care of the priorities that we have. We also know that we have 2 mauve dinosaurs, and obviously the stegosaurus that's there is not going to be one of those mauve dinosaurs. So of the remaining 4, 2 of those remaining 4 slots are going to be dedicated to mauve dinosaurs. So that's why I have 2 M's underneath the line there. And so again, I just want to remind you, feel free to do deductions, or not really do deductions, but to make note of any deductions that you see immediately without any effort, but do not actively look for any of them. If you have to scratch for them, they're generally not worth it. It's not that you're not going to find them necessarily. The time you take to find them is going to be, I think, relatively comparable to the time it's going to take to automatically come across them, testing answer choices in question. Alright, we've done our setup, we've done our rules, heading right into questions. And question 12 is our first one, and this one's a rule checker, kind of. I think in any other non-hybrid game, we could actually treat this as a rule checker because the answer choices have one class of entities in them, and that would be a complete picture, right? And so all we're doing is taking rules, comparing them to complete pictures, and eliminating any pictures that are incorrect. However, this one feels different and not quite like a rule checker because if you look at the answers, it only has dinosaur information. It doesn't have any color information, and our complete diagrams are going to have both dinosaur and color data. So this one feels more like an open-ended could-be-true question more than anything else. And so like I'm saying here, if we were to do the usual procedure in a rule checker and just take Rule 1 and compare it against answer choice A, it turns out I'd actually have to do more work on plugging in answer choice A into my diagram and seeing what the color data situation is, because A, again, only provides us dinosaur information, and our complete diagrams have both dinosaur and color information. So this doesn't quite qualify as a normal rule checker question. And so it's unfortunately not just limited to A. It looks like I would have to do pretty much the same thing for all 5 answer choices. So at this point, I'm looking at it and saying, well, I might as well just start testing each of these individual answer choices, see if they work. And that might be just as efficient as going rule by rule here. So let's just figure out if our very first suggestion, LPSUV, is a viable, could be true answer choice. So going down the list of rules, rules 1 and 2 are always in our baseline diagram. S is always in our diagram, and it's red color. There are 2 as of yet unnamed mauve dinosaurs. That's in our base diagram, so we don't care about those. R3 doesn't matter because our answer choice does not include I, so we don't need to consider I. R4 is the first one that matters, since we do have a P in LPSUV here. So if we have a P, we would have to add it to the fourth slot, quote unquote fourth slot. Again, order doesn't matter, but we have to put it there because we can't put it over any of the mauve slots because rule 4 tells us P is always got to be Y whenever it shows up. So this is what it would look like. And at this point, we have P, we have S used and P used, and so we have to deal with L, U, and V. And this is where, when we move on to rule 5, we have problems. R5 matters because we have V. It turns out if we have V, we should eliminate U. But this answer choice suggests that we are using both V and U at the same time, and that is not okay. That is not kosher. So clearly A is in violation of rule 5. We eliminate it and we move on. Moving on to answer choice B, LPSTU. Again, rule 1 and rule 2 are always in our diagram, so we are not worried about those. R3 doesn't matter because, again, our answer choice does not use I, so we don't have to either. R4, again, matters very similarly because we have a P in answer choice B. It's LPSTU, so we have a P. And again, just like answer choice A, the consequence of having a P would be to have it in the fourth slot in our diagram because, again, it can't be it can't be the stegosaurus because it's not the stegosaurus. And we also can't put it over any of the mauve colors that we have. We do have to put it over the fourth slot or the fifth slot, which is clear to have a different color than red or mauve. And rule 5 also matters since we have U. But unlike answer choice A, B has properly segregated V and U. We are not using both V and U. Or again, just a reminder, B is LPSTU. There's U there, but there's no V, so we're kind of safe. They have properly segregated V and U. So rule 5 matters, but we have safely cleared it. Rule 6, this matters because we have both L and U. So we need to ensure that at least one of them isn't in that sort of mauve gap between S and P. So the way to do that visually is to start off with our usual picture, S in the first slot, put an R under it, and then we have our two M's underneath the 2 and 3 slots, and then we have our P over the fourth slot and Y under the fourth slot. So to make sure that one of U or L is represented outside of that little 2 mauve block in the middle there, we're going to put L/U over one of the mauves, and then put U/L over the free spot in the back. Even though we don't know which one is which because the rule doesn't tell us which one is which, we do know that these 2 slots have to be dedicated to that LU partnership. We don't know which one exactly is going to go in there, but one of L or U has to go over one of the mauve slots, and one of L or U has to go over the free slot. So that's even though we don't know for sure exactly which one, that's still very helpful because we see that the last entity to test in answer choice B is T, and T has to go in that second spot over the mauve. And that one, unlike the U or L group, has certainty. T goes there and can't really go anywhere else. So far, because we went in order through rule 1 through rule 6, I know it's complied with every single rule. But just to look at this diagram again, another quick check. Rule 1 tells us there are exactly 2 mauve dinosaurs. Yep. We don't know exactly L or U who the second one is, but we know that there's 2. Let's see here. Rule 2, Stegosaurus is always present and it's always red. Yep, that's it. Rule 3, it doesn't matter because we're not using I. Rule 4, yeah, we're using P and it is yellow, so that's fine. And then rule 5, just to check, we have U but we don't have V, so it doesn't really matter. We're not in violation there. And finally, rule 6, the L and U separation. Again, we were never able to find out exactly which one is which, but we didn't have to. All we know is that we've represented the separation properly. Between L and U, one of them is always going to be mauve, and one of them is going to be free, not to be mauve, as the rule mandates. So yeah, there's no problem with this diagram that we just came up with, so the answer is B. This is it, and we're done. All right, moving on to 13. If T is out, if it is excluded, if it is eliminated, if it is not in our diagram, each of the following must be in the diagram except blank. So this is a must be true question, and it's asking us what must be true of our diagram if T is not selected. That's essentially what it comes down to. It came out a little bit more complicated than that on the page, but that's exactly what this is asking. Each of the following must be true, must be included, if T is not included. So let's see how to do this one. We'll start with stage 1. Stage 1, of course, is just plugging in the information from our stem, and this is how I'm going to go about it. Our initial pool of 7 dinosaurs is ILP, STU, V. If we pull T out of that because we're not using T, our question is telling us T is eliminated from the running. It's not in the diagram. We are left with 6 letters, ILP, SUV. Of these 6 remaining letters, we have to use 5 of them, and that's kind of convenient, right? It's not a huge jump from 6 down to 5. And there may actually be some rule that prevents us from using 2 of these letters at the same time. That would bring us down to exactly 5, and lo and behold, Rule 5 does do that. V and U can't be on the board at the same time. Now, just a word of warning. It is entirely possible that they will make a game where it's very much like this, except they won't give you something like Rule 5, where V and U end up being mutually exclusive. You have to pick one or the other, really, if you are going to use one of them. Not every single situation will have this, and so some games will remain much less certain and much more uncertain by the same token than this one will. However, it's important that you recognize that kind of pattern. Even though we technically have 6 letters, I, L, P, S, U, V, U and V have such a relationship that you can't really treat them as independent letters. It's not like you can pick U and then regardless of whatever you did with U, you can also pick V. That would be the case if there were 6 totally independent letters, but that's not the case. U and V can never show up at the same time, so at most you can have ILPSU or ILPSV because U and V can never share the same board. So really it's like we only have 5 letters, really. For the context of this question, I put them in a slightly different order. If you account for the fact that R2 always forces us to use S, and we're not using T. So if we are forced to use S according to Rule 1, and question 13 further adds that we are not using T, then really our 2 basic entity possibilities are SILPU and SILPV. Again, because U and V are mutually exclusive. They cannot be used together. So sorry in advance. I used to be pretty fastidious about separating a lot of these longer ones into several broken up slides, but this one, unfortunately, because of the formatting, I didn't really feel comfortable doing that, so you ended up with really small text, so just an apology in advance. Feel free to pause up the resolution. I did record this in 1080p max, or excuse me, 720p only, so I'm considering pushing it up to 1080, but that would just make this like a bajillion gig video for no particularly good reason. Apologies if there's anything you can't read because the text is small, but I think you should be able to see all of it at 720. Feel free to blow it up and take a look at it that way. If you're really having trouble, I'd also not be opposed to sending you a PDF copy of my slides. Just leave a comment and I'll make sure to get it to you. All right. So looking at this here, I'm just going to continue my stage 1 work, and we're going to start with the SILPU possibility. So again, remember, we have the SILPU possibility and SILPV possibility. Again, the only difference is it's all the letters that we can use except U and V are interchangeable. So we have our base diagram that looks like the usual, and then just moving right down the list because our base diagram took care of rules 1 and 2, moving into rule 3. If you're using an I, we have to have IG like so. And yes, our SILPU possibility that we're testing does use an I. So we throw I in there and we put a G underneath it. And Rule 4 tells us if we are using a P, we have to do it similarly to I. We put P in a spot where we can put a Y under it. And lo and behold, SILPU happens to use a P. So we throw a P in the back and we throw a Y underneath it. And so far, so good. Rule 5 is already accounted for because our 2 possibilities, SILPU and SILPV, those already account for the VU split that's enforced by Rule 5, so we don't have to worry about this one. Rule 6 though. This is an ouch. This is a problem. In our situation where we have this hole in our diagram with the 2 mauves, we end up having to put L and U there again because what we're testing is SILPU. We have used SI and P, so we just have L and U left. And we have nowhere else to put L and U in this picture, except in the middle there. And that's a problem, because Rule 6 tells us if both L and U shows up, one of them has to be outside of that mauve sort of block in the middle. So I'm sure some of you saw this coming already on our previous page, if you noticed the 2 combinations, SILPU and SILPV. SILPU has both L and U in it, and there's probably going to be an issue with that, because we have I and P taking up those free slots, and then U and L not really having a lot of space to be free after that. You may have seen that coming. If you did see that coming, great. I'm never going to tell you to not see that kind of thing coming. The thing is, you didn't need to. So if you don't ever feel like you are behind because you didn't see that sort of thing. If you did see it, that's great, but make sure you're not putting any effort into seeing it. Only do it if it comes naturally and automatically to you. But if you didn't, that's just as fine. That's just as great. You didn't need to, and you would have discovered it at this stage anyway, without a huge struggle. All we did was we just went literally, started at rule 1, went down to rule 6, and as we were kind of moving along and doing things very easily, because this is all simple stuff, IG, PY, that's very simple. The VU split, we didn't have to do anything because our picture itself took care of that already. So basically, we'd have tried to plug in L and U immediately and found out that same thing, except we just didn't have to be all smart and deductive about it. It's just something that happened from us grinding this out. So yeah, just apply the rules in order, the deductions will happen. You didn't need to see this coming, like some people may have. There's absolutely no need for that. So now the important thing is we are now aware of a useful rule interaction. We know that we have to be careful of cornering L and U into falling into that double mauve block. Conversely, we also know that the I and P are going to be competing for one of those free slots at the back. So that's always a questionable thing. I and P, they can show up together maybe under some circumstances, but they're both going to compete for that limited real estate in the back where they can bring their respective colors. So long story short, we know that the SILPU group of entities doesn't work. Time to check SILPV at this point. So since we just got rid of SILPU, we are now moving on to SILPV, and furthermore, we know that this is the only possibility that we have left to check. So let's see what plugging those entities into the diagram gives us. So if we have SILPV, again, our base diagram is the same. It takes care of both rules 1 and 2. Moving on to rule 3, if we have an I, we are using the IG configuration. And indeed we do, because it's SILPV. So we have an I in there, and so we do that. Similarly, rule 4 is also applicable. We do have a P in SILPV. So we're throwing the P in there, and we're putting a Y underneath it. So far it looks the same. Finally, we're getting to rule 5, where we have the V and U split. And again, this one takes care of it because we are not using V and U at the same time. Last time we tried U. This time we are trying V. Rule 6. This is where we ran into problems last time. When we have the same situation now, and we have L and V left, it turns out we can actually throw L and V into this mauve block here. We had a problem with L and U because of Rule 6, but L and V, there's no problem with doing this. So yeah, looks like we can get away with it. It's completely acceptable. So we can have L and V fill both of those mauve situations. And so now we know we saw that there were two basic possibilities for the situation proposed by question 13 STEM. We tried the first possibility and it just didn't work out. We tried the second possibility and not only did it work out, we got a fully completed diagram and there are really no other possibilities. So we have a pretty complete thing here. So now we know exactly which dinosaurs show up and what colors they all are. Alright, so again, not to lose sight of our question, if T is not included in the diagram, each of the following must be included in our diagram, except. So there really is no further stage 2 for this one. That's because our stage 1 work, where we're plugging in the information from our question stem and seeing what could be done. I mean, so I just want to make a point this way. If you didn't see that there was a breakdown like that coming in stage 1, that's okay. In a further question in this demonstration lesson, I do the exact same thing. Technically, we could have finished that question, the question I'm talking about in the future. We might be able to finish that future question in stage 1 without doing stage 2, but I didn't see that in stage 1. I was like, I don't see anything that must be true immediately, so I just went into stage 2. And as I was working out stage 2 and plugging in the rules, like, oh, actually, you know what? It looks like, actually, we don't have too many possibilities. There is some stuff that has to be true based on just purely the information that we plugged in from the question stem, excuse me. And so I just want to point out that technically you could have done all the work that we did on the previous 2 or 3 slides in stage 2, and that would have worked out the same. This is why I hate teaching things in a sort of static, pre-recorded format, even when I'm doing a demonstration of a game, simply because these labels, these words, these distinctions, they really don't matter. It's just, can you do the logical task in the right sort of sequence? It doesn't really matter if you call stage 1 or stage 2. That is the least important thing. So I just couldn't get over my annoyance with that situation, so I had to kind of put that out there. But yeah, technically there is no stage 2 work that we need to do because our stage 1 work that we just finished doing gave us one mandatory outcome, which is, again, as a reminder, this SLVIP, and their colors are R, mauve, green, yellow, as stated below. So there really is no need to look for any further possibilities, as we know that there is exactly one possibility. But again, don't freak out if you didn't technically see this in stage 1 and you kind of decided, okay, I'm going to try possibilities because the procedure tells me to go to stage 2, and in the middle of doing stage 2 you found this out. That's not important. Finding this out eventually, at which stage, doesn't really matter. Finding it out is what matters. And just for completeness' sake, technically also for this question, because stage 1 was so fruitful, we also have no need for stage 3. As we know exactly what must happen down to the last dinosaur in color, and again, for yet a third time as a reminder, this is what we found out has to be true based on not using T. Not using T forces us to do this. And because our diagram represents a mandatory outcome, when it comes to the answer choices for 13, all we need to do is eliminate the answers that we see in our diagram, because that if we see it in our diagram, it lines up with what we found out must be true, because our diagram is what must be true. And so the one answer that we pick is the except, right? That the exception that the question is looking for. It is the one that doesn't have to be true. So that's what we're going to do. Answer choice A, we definitely have a green I, so we eliminate that. B, we have a mauve V, so we eliminate that. C, we have a mauve L, so we eliminate that. D, we do not have a mauve U, so we select this one. Of course, we also know that U is not usable, so it is true that it is an exception to the must be true situation. E, we don't even need to check it at this point, but just for completeness sake, we have a yellow P, so we do eliminate that one. On to 14. This is an open-ended question, and it's basically just asking, can these two show up at the same time? And of course, the two that they are referring to is going to be the pair of letters that they have in the answer choices. So again, this is an open-ended question. So there is no stage 1 or stage 2. So conversely to question 13, where there really wasn't stage 2 or stage 3, here we don't have stage 1 or stage 2. We move right to the answer choice testing. But before we actually launch the table of power, out of pure habit, I am going to try to see if we can catch any low-hanging fruit without doing diagramming work. So this is a could-be-true question, which is kind of the friendliest of the open-ended questions. We don't have to prove, we don't have to do any alternatives, we don't have to do any mental gymnastics in terms of if it works, do we eliminate it. It's just a straightforward, just if there's even one situation in which it works, we pick it and we're done. So that's kind of the friendliest category in the table of power. And as such, it's generally more susceptible to a method like this. Based on questions 12 and 13, question 12 gave us a complete diagram that looks something like what we have on the left, ST, L/U, P, U/L, with the colors on the bottom. And question 13 had the SLVIP across the top with red, mauve, green, yellow at the bottom. So given that we know that these are scenarios that are acceptable according to the rules regime, if we can just look for a situation that complies with one of these amongst the answer choices, then we're done. We just pick that and we're done. So again, we're looking at these two situations that we saw could be true from questions 12 and questions 13. I'll just list them at the top here. And I'm just going to go through real quick answer choices one by one to see if we see them. So A tells us, asks us, can we use a green L and a mauve V? I don't see that combination anywhere. It's not in the left one, and it's certainly not in the right one. So that's a miss. What about B? Can we use LG and TY? Can we confirm that combination anywhere? No, we cannot. We've never used it. T doesn't show up in the second one, and T in the first one is mauve, so yeah, that's a bummer. C, LG and UY, also not present. We could have a UY in our first one, but we wouldn't be able to have an LG there. Let's see here. TY and UG, again, we could have a UG, but we can't have a TY in that situation in the left-hand side. So yeah, that doesn't work. And E, TY, and VR, that's another combination we never really get to see. So it's a big swing and a miss, no luck here. I still think this is a good habit to have. It took 2 entire slides and however many minutes to talk the process out to you guys, but in your head, this will be much faster. You'll just have these two tables, these two setups, ST, L/U, P, U/L, as well as SLVIP. You'll have it written out. You'll have it done. You'll have it worked out. And you won't need to be reading these out. You'll just be looking for combos in A, combo B, combo C. You'll just be looking for them. You don't see them, and you'll be like, oh, unfortunately, there's no low-hanging fruit. So even though we had no luck here, obviously it's not really much of a problem. Didn't take too much time, and the gamble could have paid off. It just didn't happen to here. And it's not like we're out of things to do at this point either. So since the low-hanging fruit didn't prove to be there, we are just going to move right into what the table of power suggests that we do. So this is a could-be-true question, and all we need to assess is the pairs suggested by the answer choice. Could it be true that they show up at the same time? And so the table of power suggests that all we need to do, not suggests, it mandates that all we need to do is just plug in the answer choice as it is, no alterations. And if we can get that unaltered version to work, we select it. So answer choice A is having a mauve velociraptor and a green, whatever L is. I don't remember what the name is. We'll just start at the top of the rules list and go down and see how we can fill in the rest of this picture and if it can possibly work. So, rule 1, already accounted for in our base diagram, we have 2 mauves. Yep. Rule 2, already accounted for in our base diagram, Stegosaurus shows up and it is red. Rule 3, it does not matter because we don't have to pick I and we don't have to use slot 5 for I. It all depends on whether or not we decide to use it. Rule 4 is very similar to Rule 3. It only matters if we decide to use P, and we could just easily put in P in slot 5 in the place of I if we wanted to. So it's optional, and it only matters if we decide to use P. So R5 is actually important, unlike Rules 3 and 4 in this case. It forbids us from adding U to the situation because we are already using V, and again, that V is coming from the answer choice that we're testing. So if we're testing A, which includes the use of V, that prevents us from using U anywhere else. So that's kind of handy. So overall, this situation posed by answer choice A seems quite flexible and open, and quite frankly, it looks like it might be possible to finish out a successful picture based on it. So I'm just going to go down the list of rules again and actually plug in stuff into the diagram, make choices as we go. So again, rules 1 and 2 are already taken care of. I'm not going to bother with those. Starting with rule 3, it only matters if we decide to use I, and so I'm just going to use I. I'm just going to throw I in there and put a G underneath it. Because it's just an easy way to test rule 3 and help complete our picture. Rule 4, now we don't have room for a yellow P in the diagram, so I am going to not bother with it. We're not going to use P because there's no place to put it because IG is in that spot now. And so finally, moving to rule 5, I'm going to not use U, so that makes us throw T into that mauve spot. So we end up with STVLI. And the colors are red, mauve, mauve, green, green. I'm just going to check this against all the rules, even though it should comport. We have exactly 2 mauve dinosaurs. Rule 1 is fine. We have the Stegosaurus is present, and it is red, so rule 2 is fine. We have an I dinosaur, and it is green, so that checks out. That's rule 3 taken care of. Rule 4 doesn't matter to us because we don't have a P, and that's all about managing P when it shows up. Rule 5 forbids us from having U and V sort of share the board, and they do not share the board. We only have V instead of U. So we're all good. So a suggestion that we have a mauve V, mauve velociraptor, and a green whatever soar, a green L, certainly could be true. So we pick it and we're done. Moving along to 15. If a yellow Tyrannosaurus was included, what must be true? So it's kind of unfortunate that we have an entity T, and also I'm using T, capital T, as a true shorthand, but that's also why I decided to make it very clear that the T, capital T, in the beginning of the question is the Tyrannosaurus entity that's being included in our picture. So if the yellow Tyrannosaurus is included, what must be true? The first thing I want to note, even though it's probably not going to be important, is that I guess they kind of have a thing for yellow Ts, yellow Tyrannosaurs, because we've seen that suggested to us in multiple answer choices previously, and I feel like I've seen it pop up before on other parts of the exam, and maybe I'm actually conflating this with previews of questions that come later, but either way, I feel like I've seen the yellow Tyrannosaurus suggested quite often by the game, and it may be totally unimportant to know, but I do like to try to notice these things, because if there's something that they seem to rely on, it may be because that's a safe choice for whatever reason, so just something to keep in mind. But with that probably unimportant aside, put to the side, let's move into stage 1. So the question stems information is that we have a yellow Tyrannosaurus. So let's throw that right into our basic diagram so we end up with something like this. Again, rule 1 is already accounted for, rule 2 is accounted for by the base diagram itself. Rule 3 doesn't matter, but we find that we could throw it in slot 5 if we wanted. Rule 4 doesn't matter, but we also similarly find out that we could throw it in slot 5 if we wanted. So we've seen that mechanism before, right? Where the I requires a free slot for its color, as does the P require a free slot for its color. So both I and P are competing for that last free spot in the back. Rule 5 also doesn't really matter to us here because V and U can't be on at the same time. They can't be in the same diagram. But there's not enough certainty to lock this into stage 1. It's going to be the first thing I try in stage 2, really. But I don't really see this as something that I can be like, oh, immediately I'm going to try things out and get a result. And rule 6 doesn't really matter because it only really matters if we're forced to consider an L and U situation, and there seems to be too much openness, at least for me, at this point, to really work with that. So even though, again, so this is the question I was referring to earlier, where you could probably find something that must be true, based on what you would call a stage 1 thing, but here, stage 1, I'm really looking for the most obvious things, and I don't see anything more obvious that I can put in, so I'm just going to move on, even though stage 2 proves that a little bit more stage 1 work could have helped. It doesn't really matter. If the work got done, the work got done. That's all that matters. So again, apologies for the very text-heavy slide. If you're having trouble seeing it, I would suggest that you bump it up to 720. Let me know if you're still having trouble seeing it after that. Then I'll consider recording this in 1080, which really on most screens should be fine for reading the text. But if it's still too small for you, because I understand some of this is pretty thin, feel free to leave a comment, and I will make sure to get in touch with you and find a way to get you guys, if there's more than one person, the actual slides for this, so you can read it and blow it up at your own leisure there. All right, so moving on to stage 2. So from stage 1, I say we here, but I really saw personally no truly mandatory outcome. But Rule 5 did give us a 2 possibility breakdown based on the non-sharing of V and U, parallel to the VU thing that we saw going on in question 13. But also there was the fact that we found out in question 13 or 14, whichever one it was, where I and P are also kind of fighting for a slot. They are fighting for limited real estate. They also need freedom to bring their own colors to the board, so they can't be in either of the mauve slots, and so they're fighting for the last 2 slots. And given that a yellow Tyrannosaurus takes one of those last 2 slots, there's also an IP sort of interplay here at the very back. So based on that, it looks like I'm just going to start with our list of entities here, which is ILP, STUV, and of course we eventually have to pick 5 of them for our diagram. Rule 2 always forces us to pick S, so that's our first pick. Question 15, of course, is predicated on including T, because they're saying if a yellow Tyrannosaurus is included, that's part of our scenario. It is included, so T is our second pick. So we have S and T picked on the board with ILPUV remaining. And so moving down the list of rules to see what our third, fourth, and fifth picks might be. Again, rule 3, if we wanted to pick I, we'd have to put it in slot 5. If we wanted to pick P, we would again be stuck with throwing it in slot 5. And that means we actually can't pick I and P at the same time either, much like V and U. So this is just my clear explanation of what I was kind of hinting at earlier. I and P are competing for the same spot at this point, much like V and U would be. So going back to our list of entities, even though it looks like we have 5 choices, they actually get bunched up like this. It's I and P are actually competing for a single spot. There's the letter L, which is by itself, and then U and V is a single spot. So really we only have 3 letters. It's just that 2 of the 3 letters are this weird IPUV sort of monstrosity. So what that tells me, in other words, if you didn't get it, is that if we have to pick a full slate of 5 entities, we have to go with our first pick S, our second pick T, our third pick L, and then our fourth pick has to be one of I/P, and our fifth has to be one of V/U. That's simply what happens when we have this breakdown here. So what we've added based on our stage 2 analysis is that no matter what, we do need to pick L, the letter L, in addition to S and T when it comes to this situation. So again, the S is picked by rule 2. It always forces us to pick S every single time. So that's one of them. Our question forced us to pick T, because that's what the question is predicated on. It's, if we include T, so we have to pick T because that's what we want to find out. So if we include T, what happens? So T is our second choice. And it turns out that our other 3 choices are actually pretty limited. One of them has to be L, the fourth one has to be I/P, and the fifth one has to be V/U. So L has to be picked in addition to S and T. And like I said, embarrassingly, we actually probably could have formally done this in stage 1, But it's, again, which stage you do it in doesn't matter. Just so long as you always give yourself a chance to find the information. It doesn't matter if you call it stage 1 or stage 2. So for me, again, this is all way too unobvious for me to consider it stage 1 work. When I'm doing stage 1 fill-ins, I am only thinking about what is the most obvious thing. Like, okay, I have a rule that says T must be in slot 4, and then the next rule says V is in the slot immediately after T. Like, that level of obvious. That's what I'm going for. Even though I could have gotten this in stage 1, it doesn't matter. I tend to find this stuff better in stage 2 rather than sitting there and forcing myself to work it out in stage 1. Either way, it's not like I'm just taking the time I would have spent in stage 1 and spending it in stage 2. It's all the same. So long as it gets done, it's all the same. So don't worry so much about, oh, this was technically stage 1. That's just don't do it. That's a misuse of the information I'm giving you. So we did just spend 5 minutes on the last slide getting to the realization that if a yellow Tyrannosaurus is included, we do have to also include an L of some kind. But the important thing is, do we know where L goes, or in other words, do we know what color L is? I don't think we do. So let's see here. We have two possibilities. Either L is one of the mauve of dinosaurs, or L is in the back with some other color. So I'm going to start with the first possibility on the left, where L is mauve. So again, our baseline picture accounts for rule 1, our baseline picture accounts for rule 2, so we're not going to bother with those. Rule 3, if we decide to include I, it's going to end up looking like this, with I and G taking up that last free slot in the back. Now, if we decide not to include I and maybe go with P instead, we'd put P and Y in that back slot instead of I. And R4 is kind of the sister rule to R3. This one only matters if we use P, and we've done it properly in the diagrams above, so I'm fine with that. So when we get down to rule 5, we have just one slot left, and we have U or V to work with at this point. And so it ensures that for the two pictures that we have, V is the only letter we can use. If we use U instead, we will always be in violation of R5 because L is in a mauve slot. So because this is our hypothetical where L is a mauve slot, we can never use U, so we have to use V. So interestingly, it looks like both scenarios require mauve L and mauve V, but I'm not sure that all of those have to be, must be trues. Because the mauve L, at least, what we did there, that was an option that we chose. Because if you go back to the very sort of first line under stage 2, mauve L is one of the two possibilities. The other possibility is distinctly not a mauve L. So we still need to test that to see if mauve L is a required outcome of the question stems information. So to repeat the question, do we know where L goes? We're not sure. We are going to try the non-mauve L possibilities. So again, our two possibilities were mauve L or non-mauve L, and so we are now going with the right-hand side picture, which is the non-mauve L. So doing the second possibility, as usual, R1 is accounted for. As usual, R2 is also accounted for by the baseline diagram. Rule 3, if we put L in a non-mauve slot in the back there, there's no room for I. It can only go in slot 5, but now L is there, so that's fine. Rule 4 is another big oof. There is no room for P. It's the only place it could have gone is slot 5, but now, of course, L is there. So rule 5 is finally when we're well and screwed. Our only two remaining letters that we can use are V and U because I and P are both unavailable. But this rule tells us on its face that we can't do that. If we have a V, we can't have a U, and vice versa. So this scenario won't work at all. If we throw L into the back slot instead of the mauve slot, it's not going to work. So since the second branch of possibilities is bust, it looks like our stage 2 work from the previous slide is all that we need. And there we found out that the only necessary outcomes of having a yellow Tyrannosaurus included are to have a mauve L and a mauve V. And of the answer choices, E says that we need to have a mauve V, and that's consistent with what we found, so we picked that and we're done. I do want to make a note. I will go over it again later as a reminder, but this one is a must-be-true question, and because I was able to do so much stage 2, stage 1 work for it, it went a lot easier than it could have. However, this is also the kind of place where, especially if you're under pressure, you're not really good at this kind of situation, where students falter quite a bit. And so when you falter, that is where the strength of a purely stage 3 analysis, the table of power, that's where that comes in. And so I will have a separate demonstration as a companion lesson to this one that will cover how to do this exact question, even if you were not able to do any of that stage 2 work or stage 3 work and figure out all the musts and all those little goings on. You can still just grind out answer choices, and it might actually turn out to be more efficient for you to do that than it is to attempt doing this stuff. So if you are looking at all the work that we've done for question 15 and it looks intimidating and it looks like exactly the kind of thing that you're not really good at and you don't want to do and hasn't worked out for you thus far, don't worry. I will do a table of power based, purely plug and chug, no deductions. I figured out nothing about this question before doing the answer choices approach. And it'll look inefficient, but if you compare it to all the work that you may not have been able to handle on this version of it, it may actually turn out to be better for you. So yeah, just a little note here before we move on. All right, moving along to question 16. If both I and you show up, what must be true? So we're just going to go for it like a standard situation that we have. Start right up with stage 1. We know where I goes for sure, but not you. So I would have to be, again, in one of those free slots where it has to be able to bring its own color G instead of using the mauve. So I has to take that spot. But U is flexible. You could be in one of the mauve slots, or it could take that final free slot in the back to take another color. It's up in the air. So based on the two basic possibilities that I mentioned in the previous slide, where U either takes or does not take the mauve slot, we're going to be spinning out possibilities, starting with the first one. So the first one I'm going to do is the one where U is not mauve. The letters L, P, T, and V are remaining to possibly fill in those last two slots. P is off the list in this case because P needs to be yellow and there's no room for that here. L, T, and V remain. And furthermore, V is also going to be taken off the list as U is being used in this possibility. So the only two left are L and T, and so they go right into the middle there. And I'm just going to check this against the rules. Rule 1 checks out. There's exactly two mauves. Rule 2 checks out. There's a stegosaurus and it's red. Rule 3 checks out because I is present and it's using a G. Rule 4 doesn't matter because we're not using a P, so we don't have to worry about giving it a yellow. Rule 5, that also checks out because U and V are not being used together. And Rule 6 checks out because we do have L and U, but we have made sure that one of those two, namely U, has the freedom to not be mauve. So we are free to not violate that rule, so this checks out. Alright, now to spin out the second possibility. So the first one we tested is when U does not take a mauve slot. Now we are going to test what happens when U does take a mauve slot. So L, P, T, and V again remain to fill in possibly the last two spots. V again is off the list as U is being used in this possibility, so L, P, and T remain. So this one is a little less concrete than the previous one, but there's still something here. It looks like L and P must share that last free slot because P needs to be yellow, and L can't be mauve because U is already mauve. So there's that possibility. But so that takes off L and P from the board because, again, if you want to use L or P, they both have to go in the back, so I'm just going to throw them in the back there. And that, of course, leaves just T in the list after taking out V. So T is the only one that's actually capable of going into that second mauve slot because, again, that second mauve slot can't be L because L can't also be mauve if U is mauve. It also can't be P because P has to be yellow, so T is the only one that can go in there. So it looks like T having to be mauve has to be true based on what we've seen. So now that we've completed both stage 2 possibilities, let's compare them. The first one that we tried was SLTIU, and that interestingly has a mauve Tyrannosaurus in it. The second one that we tried and worked out was STUI followed by one of L or P. That one also has the mauve Tyrannosaurus that we just noted. So it looks like we can't avoid having a mauve T-Rex in there either way, and mercifully, that is exactly what our answer choice A suggests. It must be true that we have a mauve Tyrannosaurus, so we are done with this question. Again, I just want to note, this is another sort of question where if you weren't able to manage all the stage 2 work, and again, admittedly, this one wasn't nearly as bad as 15, I don't think, but it can still be a challenge if you're pressured or if you're just not good at this sort of thing. I will get around to demonstrating this question as well. I'm going to prioritize question 15, but I'll probably end up doing 16 as well. Just with a purely stage 3 plug and chug brute force grind out the answer approach. Again, that sort of thing requires no predetermined knowledge or being able to magically figure out what is or isn't eligible and that sort of thing. All you need to do is consistently apply the rules one after another, and that's technically what you're doing when you're doing stage 2 analysis. But the nice thing about a stage 3 analysis approach is that it's all about answer choices. So a lot of times the problem with stage 2 is that when you're doing that sort of work, you don't know where to start. How do I know which possibility to test? What do I throw in here? What do I throw in there? Even though it technically should be obvious if you just kind of look at what you have and you're just literally going in order, I still understand that that's something that a lot of people are intimidated by, and your brains just aren't wired to think that way. That's fine. This isn't really a normal human activity to begin with. So I get that that might be the situation, and that's where the table of power comes in. The table of power, if you listen to its dictate, if you listen to its holy word, so to speak, it will bring you to the answer, and you will not need to do any of this stage 2 stuff. All you need to do is take the answer choice that you're testing, throw it into a diagram, and be careful about putting in the rules and the information that the question wants you to have. But as long as you do those two things, you don't need to figure anything out about the game. You just need to be able to fill in a diagram according to literally the list of rules as done in order, and you will get there. And of course, the promised video supplement that I will have to 15 and 16, I don't know when I'll get around to it. I am trying to do an upload a day, if you can't tell by now. But if I don't have time for it, I don't know when, but it's definitely in the works. I will definitely demonstrate on these two questions what a pure stage 3 approach, in other words, how the table of power works in a situation like this. So we are into the home stretch. Question 17. If there are exactly 2 green dinosaurs, what could be true? So stage 1, we are just going to throw in the information from our stem right away, and maybe it'll give us something, maybe it won't. So we have our S leading things off, as it always does. We have our 2 mauve dinosaurs following, and then we have 2 green dinosaurs following. The first thing I notice is that there is no place for us to place the yellow color, so there's no place for the P dinosaur. Our list is down to the 5 letters I, L, T, U, V to fill 4 spaces, and that's feeling a bit familiar again. And again, since we can't actually use both U and V at the same time, we really only have 4 letters remaining. I, L, T, and then one of U/V. And again, this is because based on the question stem, when we throw in the information from the question stem, it puts 2 G's in the back. My brain automatically says, oh, wait, now we don't have a place to put a Y if we wanted to. And if we don't have a place to put a Y, there's no P. So P is off the list. And then that brings us down to the 5 letters I, L, T, U, V. But we've seen already how the U and V breakdown works on any number of questions. Again, even if you didn't see this at the beginning when you're doing the setup, you will have seen it at work throughout all these questions. Now, that whole U and V thing is kind of touchy. We can't actually treat U and V as independent letters. We can't pick U and we can't pick V at the same time. It doesn't work that way. We can only pick from one among those 2. So really, we have to pick I, we have to pick L, we have to pick T, and we have to pick either U or V, but not both. And that again is because we have 4 spaces to fill, technically 5 letters to do it with, but of those 5 letters, 2 of them are really sort of inseparable. U and V are almost like different faces of the same coin. They do have to take up one of the spots, but you just can't have both of them showing up. So based on what I just discussed there on the previous slide, we have 2 basic possibilities. One is the ILTU, and if we combine that with the S that's always on the board, it turns into SILTU, and the other is SILTV. So we are going to start with the U possibility, just alphabetical order. Since we have an I in this, again, as usual, Rule 1 is accounted for, Rule 2 is accounted for, so I'm not going to bother with those. Rule 3. We do have an I in SILTU, so if we'd have to use the I, it would have to take one of the green spots. So it would be S blank blank, I, and another blank. And then I'm not sure that Rule 4 matters Rule 4 doesn't matter because we don't have a P in SILTU, so P is never going to show up. It's always gone. So that is what it is. Rule 5, we've already taken care of as well because we are not combining U and V. In fact, we have them separated across this possibility and the next one. So we don't have to worry about that. Rule 6 is the next one that we have to worry about. L and U. We do have both L and U in our possibility here, so we would need to split them up across one mauve slot and one green slot. We don't know which one is which. All we know is that we just need to avoid both of them being in the mauve situation. That leaves us with our last letter T, which again, T is looking kind of flexible. T is looking like our savior a lot, so T is going to go in that mauve slot. So this is the basic breakdown of the first possibility. st, one of l/u, followed by I, and then the last one is one of u/l. And as I mentioned previously, we had tried on the previous slide the possibility SIL, T, and V, or excuse me, T and U. So the possibility we need to try now is SIL, T, and V. So again, that whole U-V interchange. Well, all we're doing is switching U for V and trying it out here. So rule 3 is the same as last time. The I would have to take one of the green spots. So we'd end up with something very similar. But here's where I run into problems with this one. L, T, and V looks like it can pretty much go anywhere. None of them need to be a specific color, so it's not like P or anything like that where we need to have L in mauve or in green. And L and V, their behavior only changes in the presence of U, and since U is absent, they're kind of free to do whatever. We can have both L and V in the mauve slot, we can have L in mauve and then V in green. It doesn't really matter because L and V really have very few restrictions, no restrictions really, outside of the presence of U. So now that the party pooper U is gone, those two can do whatever they want. So L, T, and V can pretty much go anywhere at this point, so that's just what I'm going to note. This is a pretty open possibility here. Okay, so now we are moving on to stage 3, and our work from stage 2 is going to be extremely helpful because, again, all we need to do is see if we can find or plug in any of these answer choices into our diagrams. That's all we need to do, because this is a could be true question. Again, if we see an answer choice and either it's already reflected in our picture or it can go into one of our pictures, if we can plug it in successfully, then it's all we're looking for. So let's start with our two pictures here. Again, SILTU is our first possibility that we tested, and that gave us this picture. And SILTV is the second one, which didn't give us a very firm picture. All we figured out was that L, T, and V can go anywhere. Because of the absence of U, L and V are extremely free, so that gives us a lot of leeway to do almost anything in that second picture. So let's start with A. A doesn't work. There's no way for us to get that to work because we can't have any yellow dinosaurs. There's no spot for yellow. Because remember, the whole question is predicated on having 2 green dinosaurs, and 2 green dinosaurs means that we have no room for any yellows. B actually works, so we eliminate A, moving on to B. It works. In the SILTV option, we can place T in the green slot. We can just put T in the back there, and we put L and V in both the mauve slots, and that actually checks out against all the rules. I'm not going to bother doing it here because the video is long enough as it is, but you can do that if you want to. So again, the answer choice B works with our second SILTV option. We can put T in the last slot over the green, and then we can put L and V over the mauve, and that works out. And that is it for sort of the standard approach to this game. I would say that this is a pretty faithful recreation of how I personally do LG. Again, this generally goes much more smoothly when I'm not recategorizing and reordering my thoughts and rereading my thoughts too, to present them in video format. I tend not to go in the exact order that I present it here because my brain is just drawn to different things sometimes. Generally, yes, I am linear, left to right brained, so that I kind of start in order and go down in order when things are presented to me that way. So more often than not, I am actually going from rule 1 to rule 6 in that order, but occasionally you'll run into a game like this one, where the UV rule kind of stands out as fairly important, as do the I and G rules. The I and P rules, so rules 3, 4, and 5, basically. My eyes would go there first. I wouldn't always stop to go back and make sure that rule 1 and 2 are accounted for, even though they always were by our baseline picture. I wouldn't even bother thinking about that. So there's a lot of stuff, non-organic stuff that I do in these that don't really reflect how I do them, but it's kind of a necessity of the teaching format. But truth be told, when you get to doing this and you're doing this all mentally in your own head without needing to explain to anybody and kind of following in a rough order that your brain is determined is most efficient for you, this is very fast. This is very, very fast. And so I'd like to encourage you to practice. The same will be the case for you as you practice more. So again, I make a habit in these videos of going through the entire list of rules in order when filling in diagrams. It's a good habit to start from, especially if you're constantly getting lost. That is the best place to start from. But like I said, sometimes you'll be drawn to them out of order based on the importance of rules and interactions that you find, and that varies from game to game. So the version of the method I represent here, as I said, is a little bit less organic and a lot less streamlined than how it plays out in an actual testing situation. But the best way for you to get past that is to do this on your own and you will find out how much of my methodology you need versus how much of somebody else's, and you'll be able to Frankenstein together something that works for you with basically no stoppage between stuff. And so, as I mentioned after questions 15 and 16, I did not have much of a chance to demonstrate the table of power in and of itself. But I will revisit this game in a separate short video to do that precise thing. I'm kind of most interested in doing it for question 15 because I feel like that called for the most work. It was also question 15 was relatively early on in our section. Well, no, it was 3 questions in, but we still hadn't done a whole lot of work. We were still doing some figuring out. So it's possible that at that point you may have still been kind of lost and not understood how this game really works, or you would have just been scared. Anybody who knows how to do a matching game, anyone who knows how to do in and out, knows how to do this one too. It's just that people, for whatever reason, just get irrational and just get... I mean, it's not for whatever reason. I know there's test day jitters and just nervousness and all that, but from a technical level, this is... people have been prepared for this forever. People should not have been blindsided by this, but they were. And it has nothing to do with what they've learned. It's everything to do with just standard exam weirdness, which is kind of the absolute worst reason to not do well on anything, right? I think people are much more accepting of mistakes when it's like, okay, I just didn't have the technical knowledge. But I think the bitterness comes from knowing that you have what it takes to do well, but just to not be able to get to it because of other forms of sort of artificial exam friction. That's really the kicker. And I think that's what made this game difficult, more so than the content itself. But that being said, question 15 in particular, but also probably I'll visit question 16 as well. I will do those as if deductive work and figuring things out is just absolutely something that you cannot do even at a stage 2 level. And I'll show you how the table of power can kind of just grind you through based on answer choices. So again, it's not like what you're doing is different, it's just that the answer choices will now provide you a clear rubric for start here, just start here and do this, start here and do this, start here and do this. You will always know exactly what to do, and that's the power of the table of power, really. Alright, thank you for sitting through another relatively long one. Again, we have come to the point where I must pander to the algorithm. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe, that helps the channel. Leave a comment, that also helps me with the algorithm greatly. You also have my email address right here on the screen. If you have any further questions, not just about starting tutoring with me, that's not the only thing, but really any questions about or feedback about the content or anything that I've covered in particular, direct it to that email and I'll get back to you. The other thing is, if you need practice material, again, my recommendation wholeheartedly is to use the official LSAC released prep tests, those materials. They can be a little bit weirdly organized because they don't have in the title, when you click on it, exactly which exams they cover. But I do have them organized by exam number, and they go back as far as the 40s, which I think is, 42 is probably the oldest exam that you can do without really, I don't know, kind of wasting your time. Yeah, use one of those links if you want a faster version or faster path to it, but also that would help the channel, and I would like this to be a self-sustaining effort. There is an opportunity cost. That's something I always think about, right? The sheer amount of time it takes for me to do this stuff does take away from the time that I have for other forms of work, ideally other forms of paid work, right? So in that situation, I would like this to sort of be a self-supporting effort so that I feel less of that opportunity costing. If you are in the market for materials, I highly suggest that I ask very nicely that you use one of these affiliate links so that you can help the channel at no extra cost to you. Alright, I will see you in the next one.